Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Hope you all are self-regulating, using your social distance, staying staying away from other people if you don't absolutely need to. Go out and do things, and just hopefully, this whole thing wraps itself up at some point. So I pretty much have gone over all the assignments that everybody has had due to this point. It looks like for the most part, you guys are doing them. I thought doing them fairly well. I'm not going to spend a boatload of time going over barn burning and um, the yellow wallpaper, but I do want to go over them at least um, moderately, only because I think that I would be doing that in class if we were in class, and I think that uh, particularly for those of you who read it, and you have to understand that I know that a lot of times people aren't doing the readings. The only thing I can tell you is if that's a practice that you make regularly, it will come back and bite you because you will need to know those things. So particularly these two works are not that long and they're both pretty good reads. So pardon me. I would advise you to read them if you haven't. So starting out chronologically with the first of the two, um, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper, written in 1892. Um, Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Main reason I'm having you read this particular uh, work is because, as I've been saying since the class started, without femininity, you don't have masculinity, and vice versa. And although feminism was not a term that was at least widely used, I don't know, it may not have even been coined yet when Gilman was alive. Lots of people look at this work and they consider this to be a pioneering work of feminist writing. Now, again, whether I agree with that or not, I don't know. The main reason is, as I any one of you guys that has had me for a literature teacher knows, I will tell you straight up if I am really proficient on a writer or if I'm not. I don't know all that much about Gilman. She's obviously, you guys who've had me before know I study Brit Lit. This is American Lit. I was doing 18th century. This is almost 20th century. So it's a little outside my wheelhouse, but I have taught it enough and read enough outside stuff about Gilman to know that that's not why she wrote this. She did not write this story with any at least overt feminist agenda. She wrote the book, in her own words, to keep people from going crazy. Assuming you read, you understand that basically what has happened is the woman who is narrating has just recently given birth. And postpartum depression, meaning post-birth depression, is something that women have had probably since the terminology or the thought process existed that depression was an actual disease, and it is something that afflicts people that needs to be treated. You have to remember, for a very long time, there was no clinical diagnosis or even term for a person who was depressed. A good example was when William Bradford was writing of Plymouth Plantation. That was probably around, he finished it around 1647. So in it, there's a letter from one of his colleagues, a guy named, it was either Robert, I think it was Robert Cushman. And he wrote a letter where he was talking about how every day he felt like he had this rock that was crushing his soul, and he didn't know what he was going to do about it. He didn't understand what was causing it. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know where it came from. He just constantly felt like, burdened. Psychiatrists reading that today would probably say, well, these are the words of somebody who is suffering a depressive episode. My point is they didn't always have that terminology for it. And nowadays, they can come up with 50 catchphrases or 50 labels to designate a person and what ailment they're suffering from. Well, they're suffering from a mild anxiety disorder with a schizophrenic tendency and a borderline psychotic personality with Oedipal origins. Okay, so basically what I was saying there was a person who is schizophrenic, prone to psychotic episodes. Manic depressive means they can go up and down, and suffering from Oedipal issues means they have a mommy problem. Okay, that's essentially what I said there. What I'm saying is now we have a lexicon of terms, and I mean, if you don't believe me, I can tell you right now, one of my coworkers, you could go talk to Matt Hyatt about that because he knows way more about psychology and psychiatry than I do, and he could probably sit there and tell you there are literally books written with these terminologies in them about how to diagnose people and what these various diagnoses contain. Okay, so again, where I'm going with this is you have to understand this was probably one of the first times in literature that a person who was suffering from some sort of depression in the work was being clinically diagnosed postpartum, meaning the depression was the result of this woman giving birth. Okay. Her husband is a doctor. His belief is that, and this was an actual treatment. The guy's name was Dr. Silas Ware, came up with an idea called the rest cure. And what he believed that women, obviously, because women give birth, he believed what women needed was after they gave birth to just rest, to just not think about things, be put on sedatives and other kind of drugs that were actually probably experimental, meaning, they really didn't know how they would work. They just used some women as guinea pigs. And I think this woman in the story is a guinea pig because if you notice early on, she talks about how she's been treated with phosphates or phosphites and doesn't know what they are and doesn't know the difference. She's just trusting her husband is giving her the things that are going to make her better. And again, I mean, that comes down to its own can of worms there. The can of worms there is, do you implicitly trust the man you've married? And in particular, do you implicitly trust him to be your doctor? Let me give you an example of where I'm going with this in our modern times. My wife is a medical coder. What that means is there are various doctors in town, and whenever they see a patient, they are obligated to fill out a report. The report goes back to the insurance, and then the insurance figures out how much they pay. Well, my wife has to go through hundreds of these a day. Okay, or at least she does because she's one of the better coders. That's why she gets to work from home, because she proved that she could get a lot of work done. And here's where I'm going with this. Okay, let's say there's a Dr. Jones in town who's a psychiatrist, and my wife does the medical coding for Dr. Jones. Well, I wouldn't want to go to Dr. Jones to be my psychiatrist because my wife would get to see the reports that he was making about me. And in those reports, presumably, he would address things that we talked about. Well, one of the things that I want when I go to my doctor is I want anonymity. I don't want, I mean, not so much like if I have a severe health problem, I obviously want my wife to know. But if I'm going to a psychiatrist and part of what I'm going to be talking about is my marriage, I don't want my wife to know what I'm saying about our marriage. It may not be things that I want her to know. You understand what I mean? And that's why I would say, okay, well, I can't go to that psychiatrist because you code for that person. So that means you're going to be able to know everything. I'm not going to have any privacy. Okay, so again, where I'm going with this is think about how weird that would be if you were married to the person who was your doctor. I don't think that would be an arrangement I'd be comfortable with. There's a lot of issues. That's why the privacy laws are so strictly enforced with the medical profession, is because most people don't want their ailments being discussed with outsiders. Most people don't. That's why whenever you go to a new doctor, for example, they will put down on like whenever you fill out all that new paperwork, is there a relative or someone else who we can share your information with? And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not sure even at first when I got married that I listed my wife on there. I think I typically tended to put no. Now that we've been married for a while, I do put her on there. And that's not to say that like when we first got married, I didn't trust her or anything like that. I think what it was I was used to saying no on there. And I was a little bit, I don't like people worrying about me. And so if there was something wrong, I would, unless it was going to impact her life significantly, I wouldn't want her to know about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I did that. Well, again, I'm not trying to make this autobiographical. I'm trying to make it relatable so you all can understand how the story. She doesn't have that option. I mean, she basically, this guy is doping her up, giving her medicine, treating her for what he thinks is wrong. And moreover, because he is a doctor, he doesn't listen to her whenever she tells him these things aren't working. And I'm sure I know you guys are half my age, but I'm sure we've all gone to a doctor before where either we didn't walk out of there with what we wanted. We felt like it was a wasted visit, especially like when you get to be my age. I don't know how you guys, and I know for students on campus and stuff, your insurance and everything works differently than mine does. But when you get to be a grown up, you have to pay what's called a copay, which means every time I go to the doctor, I have to pay $30 no matter what they do. And there were lots of times where I went to the doctor and paid $30. And I mean, that guy did nothing. I mean, literally I could have sat here in my room and gotten the same treatment and saved $30. So, she doesn't really have an option. This guy is again, almost kind of treating her like a guinea pig and not really explaining why he's doing what he's doing. And moreover, when she expresses a grievance or a concern, he doesn't really listen to it. He feels like he is a good doctor. He knows what he's doing, and that's that. Okay. So, again, I don't want to get too much into the literary stuff of it because I don't want to turn this into a literature class. I mean, I certainly could. I could sit here and get into the metaphors about the woman in the wallpaper and stuff like that. I'm not going to really go too far down that avenue. I don't think it's generative for what I want us to do in this class. What I want us to do is look more sociologically at it and understand that, like I said, I mean, I have some notes that I've taken on the on the work itself. One of the things that also makes this book kind of interesting is the form that it takes on. If you know anything about, and those of you who are English majors in here, I know at least two of you are, the form that this book takes on is it's a diary. Okay. The diary again, and it's funny, that's a feminized term. Men, quote unquote, write in journals, women, quote unquote, write in diaries. Okay. And one of the things that's interesting about her diary is the language that she uses is often also very highly feminized. As I recall, and it may depend on what edition you're reading from. I know that I gave you guys a link but I know that in book versions of this story I have read, a lot of times the words she uses that are very highly feminized are actually italicized for effect. Like there's one part where she's talking about the garden. Oh, it's a delicious garden. She uses these words that are just, I don't want to say ridiculous, because I feel like me calling them ridiculous is to say that her being feminine or her being, overly, maybe an over dramatic woman is me saying she's ridiculous. But I think the way that the words are, the attention is drawn to the words, is supposed to kind of make you think that, this is your kind of typical domesticated, I guess we could say housewife, but she's not having to do any of the housewife chores, but just a typical woman who at this point in time, her place is to basically do what her husband says. And what her husband is telling her to do is sit in a room all day long, don't do nothing. And you have to remember this is 1892. I mean, they don't have a TV, probably don't have a radio, maybe have a radio. All she has to do all day is look at that damn wallpaper. And yes, she has the journal, but the thing, or the diary, whatever you want to call it, the journal, the diary. But you have to remember this too. The husband doesn't know she's doing that. She's not supposed to be writing. He's forbidden her from doing that. And that's one of the unrealistic parts of this book, is whenever she's like in the middle of writing something, oh my gosh, there's John, I have to put this diary away. She puts the diary away. Again, it's very, that's an unrealistic aspect of the book. But again, I don't want to get into the too much of the literature part of it. It's just what you're supposed to understand, plain and simple, is she's got to hide what she's doing from her husband. And I think that's a larger, it's supposed to be more emblematic for women as a whole, which is that at the time, if you were going against what men said you should have been doing, you were going to have to do it in secret. You were going to have to keep it hidden. And, it's almost like you were revolting against what you were being told to do. So she's being told, sit in this room, don't do anything. Her writing is an act of rebellion. So she has to hide it. Just like at this time, women coming out and standing up against men would have been highly irregular. This is supposed to probably be viewed as highly irregular. I mean, again, you had Perkins Gilman saying she wrote this book to keep people from going crazy because she had to use the rest cure, and she said it almost made her nuts. Another one of the things about Perkins Gilman, really quickly, that's I don't want to say interesting, but it's probably pretty telling about her being at the very least exercising some sort of feminist behavior during a time when it wasn't common. She believed in the right of people to commit suicide. She believed in what we call it euthanasia. She believed in, I don't even necessarily want to call it doctor assisted suicide. That's kind of what euthanasia is. But she believed that people had a right to that. If people wanted to end their lives, they should be able to. And she took her own life. I believe, if I remember correctly, she had breast cancer, and I don't remember if she actually had, I hope I'm saying the word right, the metastatic breast cancer, where they actually have to remove either some or all of the breast. That is the part that's got the cancer in it. I'm not sure if she actually went. My gut is telling me, because again, it's been a long time since I've read it, her biography. My gut is that they offered that as an option to her, and she didn't want it, and that's why she killed herself. She didn't want to have the metastasis. I want to say that's the right word. She didn't want to have, as I remember. Again, she may have, but as I remember, I'm trying to give you the best of my memory, and it's been a while. I think that's why she committed suicide. Um, she she didn't want to go through with it. And not being a woman, still I can understand why. That would be that would be something that obviously would not only be hard to deal with, but you have to think too. Getting back to this idea of masculinity and femininity, we biologically speaking, which is part of the early part of what I wanted you all to be thinking about with this study that we're doing, this course, is the idea of nature versus nurture. The idea of are we biologically constructed into men and women, or are we socially constructed into men and women? And I think I think the easy answer is that it's both. I think you can certainly have an opinion that it's more one than the other, but where I'm going with this is, I mean, one of the things women are defined by is that they have parts that men don't, and vice versa. And if somebody were to tell me, well, we're going to have to castrate you, I could tell you that I couldn't sit here and tell you, if it was a matter of life or death, I wouldn't have it done. But what I could tell you is, I certainly know that after that was done, I would probably feel less like a man than I did before it happened. Incidentally, just a side note here about that word castration and where it comes from and why it was done. Okay. I think a lot of people, nowadays they think about it's done to animals. Okay. It's not often done to human beings. But originally where that word comes from is the Italian castrati. And what the Italians did for a very long time in the Roman Catholic faith, when young boys were in the choir, their voices were extremely high. When you can hear my voice breaking from time to time now because I was out working earlier for 2 hours in the pollen, and it always does that to me when I breathed in a lot of pollen. These young boys had very high voices, and what the heads of the church wanted them to be able to do was to keep those high voices and always be able to sing like that. And they realized that, and pardon my grammar here, if some administration member is watching this, I don't really know how else to describe it. When as a young like a young adult, a boy's what they call balls drop. Okay, whenever they go through puberty, their voice deepens. And they had this theory that if they castrated, and that doesn't mean, by the way, castration does not mean cutting off the penis. It has to do with the testicles. They believe that if they remove the testicles from these young boys, they could be, 18, 20-year-olds and still have those high singing voices. So basically, once they found the kids that had the good singing voices, they felt like if they castrated them, they would be able to sing that way forever. Well, they found out that just wasn't true. I'm not going to say that their voices didn't stay higher longer. That probably did happen, but they found out that their voice didn't stay. It didn't stay exactly that way. It just didn't. And again, where I'm going with that is that's a nature and nurture thing. The nature of it is your voice is not going to be the same at 40 as it is at 7. It's just not going to be. The nurture part of it was thinking that you could do that. And yes, that's my knife procedure movement there. Thinking you could do that and that it would work. It's cruel for one thing. It's very unusual. But I wanted you all to know that that's actually where the term comes from. The castrati. You can look that up. Charlotte Perkins Gilman killed herself with chloroform. That's a chemical you can use in small doses to knock people out. You see it happen a lot of times. Like if you watch a movie, someone will have a rag. They'll come behind somebody and put the rag on them. That's chloroform and it'll knock out. Well, It's kind of like probably like akin to, those crazy people out there who sniff gasoline or sniff glue, and by the time they're said and done, they have no brain left. Well, it's probably like that. If you use enough of it, you can overdose yourself on it. And that's what she did. I don't think she drank it or anything like that, but she did use, as I recall, she used chloroform to kill herself. Just some other things really quickly. Yeah, she died in 1935 in California. She actually battled depression for most of her life. I have here in my notes. Here's something interesting for us too. In 1898, she wrote a piece called Women in Economics. It attacked social roles. She didn't think that male dominance and female suppression were necessary as gender roles. Again, that probably makes us think more along the lines of her being a feminist. But she did not, I have in my notes, she did not consider herself a feminist. So, yeah, and in 1932, she diagnosed with breast cancer, and in August 1935, she took her own life by overdosing on chloroform. So, yeah, just a couple of things to probably point out about the text too. One of the ways the text is written, and it's supposed to look that way on purpose, is it's fragmented. If you notice the way it's written, it's very disjointed. It's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to kind of show you the mental state of somebody who's rattled. So if you noticed that, then you keyed in on something that, that's an authorial move on Gilman's part. That's not accidental. Another thing is there's a lot of subtleties in what Gilman says as far as her husband treating her. I already talked about the phosphates and phosphites. One of the other things that he's always doing to her is it's all, you can look up this term too. Look up the term gaslighting. Gaslighting is almost a way where the way you interact with people, it's almost like you're trying to make them question their own sanity in things. And what the husband is doing a lot of times in this, in this book is he's making her question why she isn't getting better. And then whenever she questions why she isn't getting better, he tells her she is. And he tries his best to convince her, dear, you're getting better. You look better. You're putting on weight. Clearly you're improving here. And the improvement is all a result of the rest cure. So just keep doing it. But of course, he doesn't know that she's not really abiding by the rest cure either. So again, one of the other important things too, and I may have already touched on this, the thing about her being tired all the time, which is what John is quote unquote really concerned about. According to her, it's not the postpartum depression. It's that it's having to keep the writing a secret. It's having to hide everything from him that's making her tired. So again, what I think we see a lot of here in this book is a binary relationship where what you're seeing is that the way I read it, and I think this is probably the way Gilman meant for it to be read. The way I read it is whether or not John is being in earnest as a doctor or not really isn't that important. What I mean by that is he giving her treatments that he legitimately thinks are going to help her? I'm not sure that's that important. The thing that I think becomes the issue is that because he is the male figure, he automatically assumes that he's right, and she is automatically placed into a position where she has to succumb to what he tells her to do. Again, this would have been a patriarchal marriage, which was the standard of the time. I would say nowadays marriages are less patriarchal, but I think we still live in a patriarchal world. According to what a lot of you guys' responses on the genderized occupation, a little exercise I gave you indicated to me that you guys also still think that this, by and large, is a world made by men for men. And while I can totally see why you think that, I think you would see that if you were my age, you would see that things have moved quite a lot. The needle has moved quite a lot in 35 years or so, to where, I mean, I remember when probably, I'm going to pull out a number. I'm going to remember like days where when I was in elementary school or something, I would say, let's say I had 10 friends. I would say 7 of their mothers were probably housewives. Like they didn't have jobs. Because back in the day, like that's just the way it was. The women didn't have outside jobs outside the home. They didn't. The husband made the money, brought the paycheck home, and the wife kind of, and in that way, the wife was kind of beholden to the husband because he was the one making the money and bringing the money home. The wife kind of had to do what he said. Well, oh, you want dinner at 5 o'clock? Okay. You want to go to bed at 10 o'clock? Okay. When someone's controlling that, the money, a lot of times, you either you got to go along to get along. I mean, that's how it is. That's how it's always been. And like I said, I'm not going to go much longer on this, and I'm not going to go very long on Faulkner because that's a short story. One of the other things too that's very interesting about the book, I'm going to probably wrap these final 2 points together. You notice when she describes the room, the way she describes it, clearly either she's kidding herself or she's naive about what the room was. She talks about how the bed is bolted to the floor and there are, she calls them something like rings in the walls. And she basically talks herself into thinking that it was a gymnastics room for kids. This is an asylum room. You're supposed to think that this guy went into the country and he rented this country house for him and his wife to go to, and that he basically, it's the same thing as putting her in a nut house. Not that he's chained her up or anything, but the rings in the walls that she's describing, those are what we would call manacles. Manacles are like shackles. They're attached to chains. They're rings, and they would go around your wrists or go around your legs, depending upon. And it was basically, this would have been a room to put somebody in so they couldn't hurt themselves. Again, like the bed being bolted to the floor. Like, I mean, how many of you guys live in a place where, or have ever lived in a place where a bed is bolted to a floor? I've never seen it. Not anywhere else, maybe in a jail. And I've never been to jail. So my point is I'm guessing they're probably bolted down. They probably bolted down so people can't use it as a weapon. Okay. Same thing as like taking, when a person gets put into jail, taking their shoelaces so they can't hang themselves. Same thing. She'd been put in a crazy room. That's basically my point. Like the husband, I think that's how the husband views her. Like she's nuts. So I'm going to treat her like I would treat somebody who's nuts. And that brings me up on the last two points of it. Another interesting thing about the room, she talks about how she has a conversation with John, and she asks him, well, why do I have to have this room? And he says, well, why do I have to be in this room alone? And he says, well, there's not room for 2 beds. Now, here's something that I'll make a point about. It's not to say married men and women sleeping in different beds or whatever is that odd. My wife and I sleep in different beds because 1, our work hours conflict, and 2, I'm a really light sleeper and she's a really heavy sleeper. So it just doesn't really work. But my point is why would you talk about putting 2 beds in the same room then? You understand what I mean? Like why in the same room? Would that really help? I mean, if the person snored or something, would that help you? If the other person's always tossing and turning, would that help? What I'm saying is that wouldn't help you any. You'd still be annoyed if the person had, what you consider to be bad bedtime habits. Okay. Well, that also brings us to the idea that a lot of my students always jump to, and I love that you guys do, because I think it shows that you're thinking. He's always gone, isn't he? I mean, he's always gone. He's always gone from home. What's he doing? I mean, yeah, he's a doctor. He's probably, making house calls, doing whatever. But the other thing I would think of is that my students always say, is this guy cheating on his wife? Like, is that why, and there's also not really any sexual, interest expressed. And that takes me back to the two bed thing. Because here's my theory. I think the reason that he wants to isolate her and put her in that one bedroom away from him is because, let's be honest. Again, let's talk about biology. Okay. And again, I'm trying to keep these things as clean as possible. You guys who've had me in class know I probably tend to be a little bit more blue in class than I have been on these tapes, these streams. But here's the thing you got to think of too, especially a married couple. Okay. Clearly there was some kind of spark there, or at least you think there was. They at least had sexual relations once. I mean, they've at least had it once because they had a child. If a man and a woman are regularly going to put themselves in a situation, i.e. the same bed, where that kind of thing can happen again, don't you think it would probably happen again? And don't you think that that's one of the reasons why he doesn't want to do that with her? Because if he thinks that she's gone crazy, I almost cursed there. I'm glad I didn't. If he thinks that she's gone crazy and she has something wrong with her and she's off her rocker now, what happens if she has another kid? Is it going to be worse? Is it going to be more of the same? See, I think that he's thinking down the road a ways. He doesn't really want to put himself in a position where he impregnates her again. So he has put her in this room by herself, so he doesn't have to worry about it. So would I sit here and say he's going around town, to use the parlance, knocking boots with all the ladies around town? I don't know. I think that's certainly something that's maybe implied in the work, but I don't think that's as important as us just understanding that it's clear he's avoiding her in that way. Think about even the way he describes her. You blessed little goose. Oh, you silly little girl. He doesn't talk to her like a husband talks to a wife. He talks to her more like a father talks to a daughter. And think about that. Like a doctor-patient relationship, it's a lot like a father-son or a mother-daughter relationship. You look to that person to guide you because you trust them. You're putting your trust in them to do what's best for you, the way you would a parent, right? I mean, most grown-ups, I don't feel like I need my wife to in the morning to lay out my pills that I have to take, mostly vitamins. I don't want you guys to think I'm ill or anything. I don't need my wife to lay out my fish oil, my flaxseed oil, my kidney pill. That is my one bad pill. My kidney pill, my vitamin D and my multivitamin. I don't need her to lay those out for me. I can do that myself. My point is I don't do that for her and she doesn't do that for me. We don't need, we're grown-ups. I don't, and I have enough trust in myself and faith in myself, and we have enough faith in each other to know, oh, well, you know what? You need to be taking your vitamins. Okay, well, I'm taking them. And this guy, the way he talks to his wife is not like the way a man talks to his wife. It's the way, like, I think almost like a father would talk to a kid. So there's no equality there. Okay. Finally, I'm going to end with this because I'm up on the 40-minute mark and this is longer than I wanted it to go. So, end of the story. A lot of people have a difference of opinion about what happens. A lot of my students, most of them, what they tend to think is basically what she's describing is literal. she started tearing away at the wallpaper. She's going around the room, tearing the wallpaper off the walls. Okay. And that what happened was when John, the husband, came in, what he sees her doing is so weird. He gets freaked out, passes out, and, you know, she talks about how every time she's going around, she's having to go over top of him. Okay. That could be. That's, I think, a very literal interpretation. And to be quite honest with you, as students, that's the interpretation I'd expect students to have of it. And I think it's totally plausible, and I think it totally could be. But let me propose something that I think it actually is. I think this is one of those stories that, again, you have to suspend your disbelief about it. Okay. You know, Coleridge's idea about suspending disbelief. You have to suspend your disbelief about it. But I think, honestly, at the end of the story, this narrator has hanged herself. That's what I honestly think. I think that what she started out by doing was ripping the wallpaper off the wall. And then I think by the time John got up there, she had hanged herself. And that's why he realizes, like, it says something like he grabbed her, or he did something, and he knew he couldn't stop what was happening. And then he fainted. And then what she said was, and there he was on the ground, and I just crept over him every time. Well, think about what a dead body does when it's hanging from a noose or whatever. She also talked about in there getting a piece of rope, by the way, if you remember too. When somebody's body is hanging from a piece of rope, it doesn't just stay still. It sways, especially if somebody has touched it. Well, if he came in and he touched her body literally would be creeping over him every time her body, you know, went back and forth. That's my take on it. My take on it is basically this narrator, by the end of the story, she was driven insane or more insane by the condition that she was put into, and she hanged herself. And that's how the story ends. And that's why I think also we can go back and look at what Gilman said about writing the book herself. I wrote the book to keep people from going crazy. Well, I mean, if what you think the end result of going crazy is a suicide, then yeah. And another thing she wrote too, in that same essay, why I wrote the Yellow Wallpaper, she said, I wrote it to keep people from going crazy, and I wrote it to save lives. And then she wrote, as I remember, there was a ... and it did. So what I think is she was trying to make people understand that if you do this rest cure the way that it's being employed, the people that you're using it on are going to be driven so crazy they're going to kill themselves. There's not going to be any other way out for them. And I think that's what she meant by, you know, I wrote it to keep people from going crazy and to save lives. And I did that. So there was obviously a larger calling for her than just to write a story about. That's why I don't think she considered herself a feminist or considered this work a work of feminism. Even if that word was around, which I'm not sure it was, I'll repeat that. I think to her there was a bigger thing going on there than making like a social statement. I think to her it was more, you know, it was more personally related. You know what I mean? It would be like me writing the story about, it would be like me writing a story about how hard it is to be African-American. Oh, I'm not African-American, so how would I know that? Well, what I mean is she had credibility in writing a story about how hard it is to be depressive and ill and put on this rest cure because she was told to do that. So she knew what the, you know, the possible effects of it were. It's not like she was just writing it like a theoretical book. Like, this is what might happen if you did this to somebody. Like, she went through it. So again, like, you have that credibility there. Okay, there's a certain level of credibility that you exercise when you write about something you've gone through, and you're writing it to people in hopes that what they're going to do is see that your suggestion is that they pardon me, that they follow another path of treatment, or they're going to end up not only going crazy, they're just they're going to think the only way out is suicide. Okay, so the main reason I wanted to include Faulkner in here was simple, twofold probably. The biggest reason is this story has a lot to do with what we would call a coming of age story, a Bildungsroman, as you guys may remember me who took British Lit with me. Bildungsroman is just, like I said, the coming of age story. The example I always use is like the Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi. That's a coming of age story. Okay. The other reason I wanted to use it is because we live in the South, and this story is an example of what's called the Southern Gothic. The Southern Gothic literature is literature that's made to look to make the people look kind of twisted, grotesque, odd, sort of eccentric. Faulkner did a really good job at doing that. Some people might say he set people's perceptions of the South back 50 years. But there was probably a lot of truth in the things he was writing also. What I used to do, of course, it doesn't have a fitting place in this class. I used to always show the movie Sling Blade along with this work, and along with the Yellow Wallpaper, to discuss the idea of institutionalized insanity and Southern Gothic. Basically, the thing I wanted to make the point about in this story is that when you read it, you probably shouldn't be thinking of that like kind-hearted Southern stereotype, like a Forrest Gump. Even though in the book, there's a book Forrest Gump. Even though in the book he's kind of a jerk, in the movie he's like this super sweet guy. Well, the people in the Faulkner stories are not like Forrest Gump. Okay, they're not extraordinary people, and they're not admirable. They're pretty. I'll use a term a lot of people, I think, when they hear it come out of my mouth, they think it's weird to hear it, but I guess it's an offensive term, but I grew up hearing it. I'm from Virginia. I grew up hearing it so much. When I think of the term, I don't think it's offensive. And I always tell students, if they think it's offensive, tell me and I won't say it. But they're white trash, basically, is the those are the people that Faulkner's writing about. They're just bass-ackwards, just, I hate to use the term like scum of the earth, but that's kind of what they are. They're just bottom-feeding, white trash people that don't have a pot to piss in. They don't have a window to throw it out of. They're usually not good people either. And that's what you see here. I mean, Abner Snopes is not a nice man. Abner Snopes tries to accuse a black man of committing the crimes that he has committed, which is burning down people's barns, because apparently he's a pyromaniac. Okay, I mean, that's not a good trait. If you don't know what a pyromaniac is, it means it's someone that's obsessed with fire. And that's the way he gets revenge on people. And it's known. That's the worst part. People know that he does that. He walks into the house of an aristocrat and basically commences to grind the crud off of his boots into this guy's like French rug, because he doesn't have anything. So he doesn't care about doing that. And two, he doesn't know what it's like to have anything nice. So it doesn't mean anything to him. It's like if any of you guys have ever loaned somebody something and they don't have a damn thing, and they return it to you and it's beat up or it's broken, or they didn't take care of it, and you're like, I let you borrow this in good faith and you return it to me like this, and then it's almost like they have no clue that they've done anything wrong. That's the kind of person that Abner Snopes is. Then he tells his daughters how to clean the guy's rug, and they use lye on it. And if you don't know what lye is acid, basically. Okay. So, you wouldn't use lye on a rug, and you definitely wouldn't use it on a delicate rug. And so it eats a hole in the rug, and then the judge sentences Abner Snopes to have to give him all that corn. And that's how Abner Snopes makes a living. So Abner Snopes always walks around with a chip on his shoulder anyway. He's just not a good person. And this is where I wanted to go to about why I picked this story. Is his son Sardi is trying his best to become a man despite having a lousy male role model. If you remember at the beginning of the story, he knows his dad is burning this barn now. He knows he burned the barn. And so the only thing that keeps him from ratting his dad out, two things probably, is either fear of his dad, or it is my dad, and to rat him out would be, to go against my family. But when he's asked the question, he makes the fatal mistake of hesitating and giving an answer, and Abner sees it. And so after the court, appearance is over, Abner confronts Sardi and says, why did you not say your answer right away? Why did you hesitate? Why did you pause? And Sardi really doesn't know what to say, because he knows that Abner knows why. And it talks about the quote that's in there is something like, he hit me for doing that. And then the follow-up quote is, it certainly wasn't the first time he hit me, but it was the first time he ever explained to me why he hit me after he hit me. So what I think you're supposed to get an idea of is this guy's just a mean, nasty bastard. He's abusive, not a good person. And he's going to do everything possible to keep Sardi in that never-ending circle of BS that Abner himself has really perpetuated. And at the end of the story, we know that Sardi leaves. And it's a disturbing ending, because one, we know that Abner went and he burned down. We know he's going to burn down another barn, and he wanted Sardi to come help him, and Sardi wouldn't come help him. And the other thing is the end of the story. What we have with Sardi is we know that Sardi's abandoned his family, but he doesn't know what he's going to do. And, you have to think, this is, a kid going out into the world by himself because he feels like he needs to make a clean break from what he is. Again, it's that idea of being a man. Well, what makes a man? There's a movie, The Big Lebowski. It's one of my favorite movies. This old man is asking the Big Lebowski a serious question, and he says, what makes a man? Is it the ability to make the right decisions in the face of challenges, even if the outcome isn't what one wants, or something like that? And Lebowski says, that and a pair of testicles. And the old man goes, perhaps you're right. Perhaps that's what it has come down to. And the point is, a lot of people think, biologically speaking, well, you got a pair of balls, that makes you a man. Well, yeah, biologically, I guess. But isn't how you act a lot more of a litmus test of whether or not you're a man than the simple fact that you have the equipment that biologically God gave you that designates you as a man? And again, I'll bring this up too because I'm no expert on it. But again, in these days, we also have to think about people who are transgender. I mean, how do they identify? What I'm saying is those biological things are not ready. They're not ready indicators. They're not. I mean, yes, you can look at those things, but they're not ready indicators. Sardi, I think what Faulkner was trying to say is that sadly, this kid who's probably, I'm going to say 10 or 11 years old, he has more of a moral center than his father does. And where are we supposed to be learning our morals? Where are we supposed to be learning it? If you're a boy, where are you supposed to be learning your core values about being a man? Those sort of values that our society has been bedrocked on. Men, for example, they work for a living. They're honest. They take care of their families. They work hard. They stand up for themselves. They're assertive. They do a lot of things they don't want to do, but they know they have to do them. They instill and they exude this self-discipline. And whenever you're a young person and you don't have that around, what happens to you? And I think that's one of the reasons, my argument, I would say, one of the reasons why this story ends the way it does. You don't know what's going to happen to him. Because society is the same way. We wouldn't know what to make of someone like that. Look at the world, and again, this is where I'll end. Look at the world we live in today. And it is not some people out there would like to make it an ethnic problem. In this country, as far as this particular issue goes, we don't have it's not an ethnic problem, it's a man problem. What we have across the board is a lot of particularly younger men, they don't have any problem doing the deed and having a kid. They just have a problem sticking around and doing what's right once they have the kid. And that's why, again, I know the percentages are higher in some communities than others. I believe, if my memory serves me right, almost 3 in 4 African-American boys grow up in a home without a significant male role model. I think it's something like 74%. And I don't actually think that Caucasians are too terribly far behind. Again, this is not an epidemic that has a lot to do, or at least it doesn't have exclusively to do with people's ethnic background. It's an identity issue. It's an identity thing that has to do with men not behaving like men should. And who pays the price for that? It's always the kids. It's always the next generation. And if they don't have anybody telling them and teaching them right from wrong, what happens then? They go out in the world and do the same thing. I could give an example about my wife's ex-husband, who cheated on her multiple times. Ran around on her and had no involvement really to speak of with his own kids, probably until I entered the picture. And that was just because I think he was concerned that I was trying to usurp him or something, which, wasn't the case. But where I'm going with this is, my wife's oldest son, you know, he the morals or lack thereof that he viewed, that he held toward relationships and sexual behavior were absolutely null and void, because he didn't have a good male role model around. And by the time I had gotten there, he was already, he was almost old enough to drive. So like what I'm saying was his way of seeing things had already been formulated. There wasn't a whole lot I could do to really derail what he had learned from his father, which was the way men behave is they run around on women, and as long as you're getting yours, then everything is fine. And I know that seems like we came a long way around, didn't we? We came from feminism to almost hypermasculinity in a 1 hour lecture. But it's funny how, again, these things are all intermingled. And I think that, what we can learn, and I think what we're going to see as we work our way through, I believe the next section is probably one of my favorite ones. We're going to see how socially prescribed roles, mostly for men, because this is a men and masculinities class, but for women too, socially prescribed roles can create an awful lot of problems for people who feel like they absolutely have to follow those rules to a T, or else they're in violation of something, or they're going to be seen as something less than a man or a woman. And that, again, the social construct probably plays as much, if not more, of a role in determining a man's behavior, and I would say a woman's behavior too, than just the biological construct of, well, men have a deeper voice and women don't. Women have breasts, men don't. Men have a penis, women have a vagina. Okay, we know all that. All right. My point is those things I don't think have as much to do with the way we ultimately see the world and behave. I don't think they have as much to do with that as when we look around and see what's going on around us, particularly when all we see is one thing. That's what becomes normal. And if your normal that you see is a man who beats his wife, cheats on her, doesn't respect women, doesn't care, is violent, then you probably shouldn't be too surprised if the byproduct of that becomes that way. Okay? Whereas if you have the proper kind of modeling, stuff there to frame your behavior around, a lot of times that's all it takes to separate a man who respects people and treats them right from someone who basically is just a man in form. Because again, there's a certain code of behavior that kind of goes along with being a man that has been established over time, and it's becoming less and less prevalent. And it's becoming more and more that men seem to be just men because they have the biological ability to be one. And I'm going to end the lecture on this note. And it goes for men and women. Just because you have the ability to produce a child does not make you a man, and it does not make you a woman. It just doesn't. I mean, there's more, there's way more to it than that. And so that's where I'm going to wrap up the lecture for this one. Be sure you take your quiz before this evening. And next week, like I said, I think you guys will enjoy some of the clips I have for you to watch. Sorry, my voice broke there. And I hope that you all are well. And I will be seeing you the next time I come through one of these lectures, and I hope they're helping. Okay, so I'll see you.